Hello and welcome to the Eclipse Rise of the Ancients instructional video. This is designed to go through the expansion and look at each of the modules in turn and give you a better idea of how they would be integrated into the main game. It's also going to give you an overview of the rules with a view that you can understand them and be able to play straight from the box. I think that this adds a lot to the game. It makes it a lot more exciting. So without further ado, let's get stuck in and have a look at some of the exciting new technologies that are available for us to research. So the first addition that the Eclipse expansion has is some rare technology. Rare technology is drawn alongside the normal technology tiles. You simply add these technology tokens to the technology bag. You would ignore the actual rare technology when counting how many techs you draw. So you will still draw the same number of normal techs. It may mean that you have more than the usual number of techs coming out in each turn. I've laid out each of the techs and I'll just briefly talk through them, but it's really as simple as adding these to the technology bag. So it's a very easy addition to incorporate to your game. The first one is the Flux Missile. You can see it acts as a missile with 2 ion hits, so 2 yellow dice. It also improves your initiative by 2 pips, so it means that you can move slightly faster. It costs 11, down to 8. With rare technologies, they can be placed on any one of your tracks, and you will be able to claim the discount that you would get on that track wherever you decide to put it. So they act as fillers. You may not want perhaps the artifact key, and this would be a nice one for us to put on that bottom track instead if we wanted to get the victory points for specialising in technology. I don't think the Flux Missile is a particularly interesting new tech. Some of the other ones I think can be quite game changing. So going down, we have the 0 point source. That is effectively a big power source. So you can see quite a lot more expensive, 15 research to buy, and effectively it's a power source of 12. So nothing too exciting there. This is where we start to get maybe to slightly more interesting ones. The Sentient Hull is basically a hull point as well as a computer. And you'll notice it doesn't use any power, so I could see that this could make sort of quite interesting use, especially on interceptors where you don't have a lot of space. It could increase their survivability and actually give you a cheeky computer point as well. It's pretty cheap to research, so it's a nice filler one for you to pop in there as well. So in that regard, it is perhaps one of the more interesting ones that we have within the expansion. Moving on, we have perhaps the most interesting in terms of the way the game changes. The Interceptor Bay, it cannot be equipped on interceptors. You'll see here you've got these 2 weird icons. It does confer additional hull point and it requires 2 energy for you to use. Effectively, what this means is that you can move your ships into another ship. So you can move your small interceptors into your bigger ship, and you can move 2 into each interceptor bay that you have. In order to do that, you need to use a ship activation, so you need to use your standard ship move action. But of course, when they're in the ship, you will now be able to move that cruiser and all of the interceptors without having to move the interceptors individually. I very much like this one, simply from the idea that it can your ships can disgorge a great deal of little mini ships and swarm people, and I think that that's quite cool. So this is definitely one of my favourite researches that the expansion's brought. The Conifold hull, you've got some spiel on it in the rulebook, but it's effectively 3 hull points at a cost of 2 energy. Not very interesting. But I feel that once you hit the antimatter cannons, a lot of people move away from getting hull and start focusing on shield, simply because improved hull doesn't really do a lot against 4 pips of damage. So maybe this would actually broaden the tactics, but it's worth mentioning it does require that 2 energy, which of course can cause slight problems. So those are the expansions for the ship themselves. The rest are just research tech to stick on your board. The first one is the Neutron Absorber, and you can probably guess that this negates neutron bombs. So that's really all it does. Again, a relatively cheap technology. It's worth noting that it does not wipe out the planter and their disadvantage. So if you are the planter, you still will get your population cubes wiped off when people move into your areas. But it is quite a nice way of slowing down people's spread. It's certainly something I would be looking into researching in games. We move on to arguably one of the very best ones. The antimatter splitter means that when you use your antimatter cannons, it causes 4 points of damage, and you can choose how to arrange that damage. This synergizes really well with the point defense system later on, which we will come to, but I think that this is a very powerful thing. It only costs 5 points, but obviously you'll have had to have researched antimatter, which in itself is quite expensive, before you can really gain any benefit from it. Moving on, you have the cloaking device, another one which I think is very exciting. It requires 2 ships to pin one of your ships. So now, if there's only 1 ship in each of your enemy's sector, you can sneak through and it's as if they were never there. So I think that this is a really exciting one. It doesn't use any required space on a ship itself. It doesn't use any power, and it's a really juicy one to research. It would certainly be one of the ones I would be looking into if it came out. Point defense system. This one's interesting. There is a number of elements in this expansion that has tried to de-teeth the power of missiles. For any experienced Eclipse veterans, you'll probably have realised that plasma missiles are relatively OP, especially with modifiers to hit. This is one of the big ways that they have tried to negate some of that OP-ness. So this is saying that you can now shoot down the missiles. So when you have a missile and the missiles are fired, you are now allowed to counter-fire, and you can try and shoot them down. And of course, 1 hit with an antimatter cannon, if you've got that antimatter splitter, is going to mean that they are going to be hitting really rarely, because 1 hit will wipe out 4 missiles in one go. And finally, a very cheap, free upgrade, so it doesn't take any space up on your ship. The Distortion Shield confers a -2 modifier to hit with missiles. Again, a very nice anti-missile strategy. So these are the advanced techs. Like I said, they get drawn out of the research bag as normal, and you can simply ignore the fact that you've drawn one and carry on drawing normal techs to the number that is required for your game. They sit alongside the tech board and people can research them, and when they're researched they're obviously taken off, so there is only a very limited number of these things, and I would imagine when one of these things comes out, the first player is probably going to try and grab them. So that's the first expansion. Let's look at the next. So the second expansion is the idea of developments. These are again drawn randomly at the start of the game, and this time they are set out on the side of the board, available for acquisition, if you like, from the get-go. They are acquired through a research action, and the number you draw will depend on the number of players. There is detailed rules in the rulebook, but it's effectively 1 plus the number of players. So in a 3-player game you would draw 4 developments. They typically don't nearly always require research points, but they are still acquired through the research action. So let's just have a look at them. First we have the Ancient Monument. This requires 13 economic resources and simply gets you 3 victory points at the end of the game, which is quite nice. Moving down, we actually have this thing called the Warp Portal, and that actually gives you a tile for you to place on a sector. So you can see this is the Warp Portal tile here. It is essentially a new expansion. Some of the new tiles have these Warp Portal symbols, and effectively a tile with this on it would be connected to all of those portals. It requires 8 manufacturing resources and would gain you a victory point if you own that tile at the end of the game. So the Ancient Monument is simply 3 Veeps for you to have. This is again one of, like orbitals, one of the things you need to keep control of Same with monuments as well. This is an interesting sort of variation of the artifact key and artifact link. 7 manufacturing, 7 economic resources, and again it gets you 1 victory point per artifact you have at the end of the game, so it's just another tool, if you like, for building victory points. Now, whilst I don't think that the victory point tiles are particularly interesting in their own right, they are obviously different ways you can gain VEEPs, and that in turn gives you sort of more depth of strategy. Going down, we have the diplomatic fleet. This is actually quite a cheap one. It only requires 6 resources, and effectively that gives you an extra person you can ally with. So when you make an additional alliance, you would put the cube on this tile instead of on one of your ambassadors. Again, I'm not sure how often I would get to use this. Speaking as someone who's played Eclipse a bit, I am maybe a bit of a betrayer and therefore don't generally have my full allotted amount of alliances. But I suppose it would be nice when you start getting those victory points from battles to be able to have that extra flexibility with a diplomatic fleet. You can see the shell world. This is again like the warp portal. It comes with a tile that you place on the board. This is costing quite a lot, so 20 manufacturing resources. It acts as a science planet, so just like an orbital, you can put a science cube on there. You cannot put an economic cube on there, so it is science only, but it's worth a whopping 5 VEEPs. And it looks a bit like a Death Star, so it's always nice to have a Death Star. I think that's why it's worth 5 VEEPs in my eyes. The rest of them are simply sort of ways to exchange resources. So the research station, 5 economic, 5 manufacturing for 12 research, so obviously a slightly better conversion rate than normal. The trade fleet, 5 manufacturing, 5 science for 12 economic, and you guessed it, the mining colony, 5 economic, 5 science for 12 manufacturing. So those are the tiles. Like I said, you draw 1 each, well, the number of players plus 1. I think that this one will give itself quite a lot of randomness. For example, some of them, such as the Shell World, the Warp Portal, are quite exciting. Some of them are maybe slightly less exciting, so it will lend itself to a bit more variability within games. So that was the development. The next edition is that of Ancient Homeworlds. In a 4, 3 or 2 player game, you obviously don't have necessarily a full amount of space. So these Ancient Homeworlds let you essentially fill up the spaces with extra ancient ships. Okay, so this is essentially a dummy player in the form of ancients, and this is their starting tile, and you can see it's of a similar nature, maybe not quite as good, but of a similar nature to one of the starting tiles from the base game. They are protected by a cruiser. You can see that there is this little extra sort of symbol which implies that they are protected by stronger ships, and I've given you a few examples, well, all of the examples of these ships underneath. Now they are a bit more difficult. You can tell from the sheer amount of information on them they are hitting a lot harder, and they actually have some of the new technologies that we've already met. So this one has that distortion field that makes missiles harder to hit, and they've actually got nasty red antimatter missiles which we haven't been given access to yet, and this one has the point defense system. You can see this one has quite a lot of hull, and going down you've got sort of ones with normal plasma missiles, one which is very fast, you've got one with an antimatter cannon which hits quite often, and so on and so forth. So they are very much upgraded versions of the ancient ships. They are a lot harder to take down. They are actually worth 1 victory point when you defeat them. So when you defeat them, you take that tile, and that is a victory point. You also get to draw 2 shields from the bag as you would in a normal battle. So you are getting a significant number of victory points, potentially 5 plus the 3 for taking control of the tile. Obviously you cannot take control of the tile until the cruiser is defeated. Now I'm sure some of you are thinking, aha, but what about the descendants of Draco? The rules have said that the ancients are a confusing, unknown race and so on and so forth. Basically, descendants of Draco don't get these as freebie tiles, so you're going to have to conquer these cruisers even if you are the descendant of Draco. Another addition is the idea that the ancients, so the whole theme of this expansion is that the ancients are more active and they have taken over the galactic centre. So just like the original monster in the galactic centre, this big ship pins all other ships, and you can see here it's not quite as heavy on hit points, if I remember rightly, but it's more of a beast. So it's got some decent initiative, it's got 2 plasma guns which are hitting on +2. This symbol, again it's not one you'll have seen yet, is essentially regeneration. So every round I shoot it, so say I hit it once with an antimatter cannon, so it takes 4 points of damage, it still needs 2 left. Well, that's the end of my round, it will regenerate 1 hit point. So that can be quite powerful. I'm not sure if it's more powerful than the original one. I don't know that it's quite as easy to take down. It does more damage, it can pop cruisers and stuff a bit more easily, so I suppose that's quite interesting in itself. As you can imagine, the descendants of Draco don't get to walk all over this one either, they will kill it. Again, if you flip the tile, this is another version of it, so you can see this one has loads of missiles and an antimatter cannon, so you've got a bit of variety. Again, when you take this tile, it's worth 1 victory point, and you are actually allowed to draw 3 normal shields as well. So again, it's going to be worth a lot of points. The ancients aren't quite done, we still have one other big element with regards to the ancients as well. So, another area where the ancients come in are 2 extra tiles you've been given, one in the 3rd sector and one in the 2nd sector, and the rules effectively get you to shuffle these into your 3rd and 2nd sector decks. They're a bit different to what we'll have seen before, so we have these tiles here. You can see that the 3rd and the 2nd sector obviously are both quite juicy, considering that they are in the 3rd and the 2nd sector. You'll notice that there's obviously a little present, an ancient present as I like to call it in my board game plays with Eclipse, and 3 ancients in this tile. And there's this weird ass number system around all of these wormholes. Effectively, this is the ancients kicking our butts. If you're the descendants of Draco and you draw one of these tiles, you are not allowed to place it, but you are allowed to move into a tile that has already been placed, and the ancients won't attack you. What happens is at the end of the round, the dice will be rolled for each of these tiles, and say I rolled a 1 and I had a tile in this space, then the ancients, one ancient ship would move into that space and they would attack anyone there. If I hadn't left a ship in there and I just had population cubes, then they would neutron bomb my planets, which is pretty evil when you think about it. So they do have neutron bombs, but they only use them after our ships have been destroyed. Obviously we can have ships there. What I think is really mean is that the ancients are always the defenders. So even though they'll have moved into that space and will be attacking us, they still will be treated as the defenders. So it's just a little extra way that you've got this alien ancient attack going on. If there is no wormhole on the other side, it doesn't matter. The ancients are deemed to be equipped with wormhole generators, so they can move through the half tiles. So they're known as alien hives or ancient hives, and that is effectively how they work. So it's worth remembering that they do have those nasty neutron bombs. So that's the idea of the ancient hives. One more interesting tile to talk about, and then we can move on to these aforementioned presents, because there's some new exciting ancient presents left behind for us. So the final tiles before we get to the discoveries are that of warp portals. Now we've already met this, with regards to one of the developments that we could do, but these tiles are actually ones which you can find within the game, and again you'd shuffle them into your deck. There is one level 2 tile which has a warp portal in it and 2 level 3 ones, and you can see they have this symbol here. Effectively they are all linked together, just like this with a wormhole at the other side would be linked. This is linked to this and the tile which we find this warp portal on as well. So they are all linked together. You can perform influence actions through them, you can move ships through them. They basically open the board up a lot more, and certainly in some games of Eclipse I found where you've been sort of a bit trapped in, this gives you a way to really open up the thing. So it makes it much harder for people to sort of hide behind one impenetrable barrier. And I think quite a lot of other elements of this expansion do that as well, with like the cloaking field, and we will see one of the other discoveries that's there will help people sort of beat gun lines and things like that. You'll notice I have spoilt the fun a bit. I've shown one present. So one of the ancient discoveries is that of a warp portal. So simply you would have placed it down like this, and then when you flip it, or when you look at it to decide whether or not you want to flip it, you would then flip it and place it there. Now interestingly, this is quite a nice example. We've already got a warp portal here. If you do find the warp portal discovery on the warp portal tile, you must take the 2 victory points. You cannot use this on another tile. So if you have found that just means you've got 2 victory points. So these just open up the game, and that's effectively their purpose. So these are the new discovery tiles. We've already talked about the warp portal. It's worth mentioning that it is worth 2 victory points when it is by the person who controls that sector, and of course they've all got the ability to be kept and not used and just be held as 2 victory points anyway. You can see we have 2 orbitals, so 2 ancient orbitals, and you'll note that they do actually have artifacts on them. So they do, or they are affected by the artifact link and the artifact key. Then moving down, we've got the sort of less interesting ones, the resources. So 3 economic, 2 science, 2 manufacturing, and there are 2 of those. So they're not bad, but that's not why you go and explore and blow up ancients to find boring resources. You want the tech. So let's have a look at some of the tech, because it's pretty cool. So the first one probably doesn't look that exciting. The muon source is 2 power and 1 initiative. And you're probably sitting there thinking, Chris, why on earth would I want that? It's a bit naff. The cool thing about the muon source is that it sits outside the blueprint of the ship. You do not use one of your blueprint spaces for the muon source, so it's effectively 1 extra initiative and 2 extra power for nothing. So that's pretty awesome. Obviously, in my humble opinion, cruisers are the best, so that's going straight on a cruiser, and that's going to power up some other cool weapon. We then have the morph shield, 2 initiative, -1 to hit, and then it's got this regeneration symbol. So if you are in a battle and they don't blow you up at the end of the turn, you can heal 1 hit point. So that can be quite good. I'd imagine it would synergize quite well with that conifold hull, the one which had 3 hull points that we saw earlier. The Ion Disruptor is just a free gun and 3 initiative at the cost of no power, so that's quite nice. It only does 1 hit, it's obviously not very powerful, but it's still a nice way to get to fire first, and then we get to the Mac Daddy one. I might even zoom in a little bit, just so we can appreciate it all that more. There we go. The jump drive. You can't go wrong with this. So 2 power to use, but you can go to any hex adjacent to your hex for a movement, and there doesn't need to be any wormholes there at all. That's a big game changer. If someone gets that on their cruisers, then they can wreak havoc on everyone else. So that one has me written all over it. I could just I can hear the people's outrage as I betray our trusty alliances with my snazzy cruiser jump drive equipped people. So it's a pretty good one. It's one of the better ones. I very much like the Muon one as well. And you'll notice that the 2 power from the Muon source just happens to power the jump drive perfectly. But you have to be quite lucky to get both of those ancient discoveries in one game. But boy howdy when you do, it's going to be powerful. The last addition, before we get to the new races themselves, that I'm going to talk about is that of alliances. They look pretty cool, but there's actually not as much there as you might think. So alliances are only available in a 4, 5 or 6 player game. In the 4 and 5 player versions, you can only have 2 people in the alliance. Alliances are essentially to try and help someone out who's been pinned in by ancients and has had a naff time of it at the start. It allows people to ally properly. So that means you can move ships into their space without attacking them, and you can do joint attack operations. Effectively, you will be able to attack together, which is of course a big advantage, and you can win the game together. What you would do is at the end of the game, you would add your points up together. So say I had 30 points and my colleague had 20 points. So that's a total of 50 points between the two. So effectively we have had 25 points, and if that's the winning score, then the alliance has won. You'll notice that just being in the alliance with 2 people would get you 4 points in itself. So I suppose there is quite a big bump in points in that regard. There are a few other rules. You may leave the alliance at pretty much any point, in which case you become a betrayer, and you'll see that that is actually quite punitive. It's got -3 to your victory points, and it doesn't affect your diplomatic relations, and it doesn't give you the traitor card, so that can be quite important. If you have ships in the same space as your allied player when you leave them, you're deemed to have attacked them, and therefore you do then become a traitor. There are actually quite a lot of rules here, so it's probably one of the areas you might want to actually read up properly if you were to buy the expansion yourself. You cannot form alliances in the last round, and that's just basically to prevent people screwing up the end game for everybody. And we've already talked about the scoring. The final point that I think is worth mentioning is if you are allied with the descendants of Draco, the ancients will still attack you. So you cannot. So if you were to move into a descendants of Draco tile where it had ancients on it, then you would have to try and attack them, and your descendant allies are not allowed to fight the ancients on your behalf. So it's worth mentioning that. It would probably be a dumb move, because the descendants get victory points for having ancient tiles. For you to go and start blowing them up would piss off your ally, to put it mildly. So I don't think that that's going to be a big deal anyway. So that's the end of the main sort of optional extras that you can add into your game. There is one other one which I very much like that I haven't talked about because it's just literally a card, and that's the direction of play card. And simply what that means is that the first player to pass on any given round will become the first player. The second player to pass will be allowed to choose in what way the game will be played, clockwise or anti-clockwise. So if the player to my left has just passed, I'm thinking that's very bad, it means I will be the last player. If I become the second player to pass, I can reverse the flow of play, and now rather than being the 6th player to play, I'm actually the 2nd player, so I get a bit of an advantage on the research track. I think that that's a really cool addition, but it's just a card, and I think, to be honest, it was inspired by house rules from the Geek, so that's quite exciting too. So just before I move into the races and their cool new rules, there is a sort of a little supply board that's quite shiny. I'll just get it and show you. So this is the compact supply board, and it's just a much smaller, easier way to see all of the research and stuff and the turns. You've also got very clear instructions at the bottom of how many of each thing that you need. So I think that's quite a nice addition. There's quite a few extra bits of the base game components as well, and I think that there's certainly reviews which have highlighted that it just speaks volumes of the quality of the publisher, and I'm inclined to agree, because there was no need for them to put those extra bits in, but because, as you can see, they've now actually upped it to 9 potential players. I think it's really, really classy of them to include that sort of element as well. So without further ado, let's move on to the funky new races. So the first race that we're going to be talking about are the Keepers of Magellan. Now, in the base game, each of the player boards was double-sided, with humans on one side and an alien race on the other. These are effectively taking the place of the humans in this particular expansion. So there are 3 potential people who can play the Keepers of Magellan. They are probably the most basic of the new races. You can see that they start with a fusion source, so a pretty bog standard tech. Their ships are nothing particularly interesting. There are a couple of exciting rules that they actually have. The first is whenever a technology is placed on the 4th space, you are able to take a discovery tile. It is only a one-time bonus, but still, that's pretty cool. So you can see at the top, just as always, I love the boards in Eclipse. I think that they're so clear and so intuitive. You can see there is the discovery tile, and that means that you get to take one of these discovery tiles when you reach that space once. Now, if it's a warp portal, that goes into your home base. If it was one of those ancient orbitals we saw earlier, that goes into your home base. If it was a cruiser, that would go into your home base. If you'd already built an orbital in your home area and then you drew an orbital, it would only unfortunately be a 2 victory point tile. If you had built the warp portal and so the development of the warp portal, and you drew ancient warp portal, again it would have to be the 2 victory point tile. But still, for a person like me who absolutely loves alien technology, then I think that that's quite interesting. The only other rule which is really worth noting is over here. So you have the normal colony ships. As you can see, you have the 3 colony ships there. You may be able to, well, at any point you can turn over one of those colony ships to gain a resource. So that is quite exciting. So that makes things pretty cool. You'll also notice underneath that you have 1 victory point at the end of the game for each discovery tile you used as a part or discarded or whatever. So it's a choice between keeping 2 victory points or actually using it and still gaining a victory point. So that is pretty exciting as well. Other than that, it's a bog standard board really. 3-to-1, 4 diplomacy sort of things to go on, 2 movements, 2 upgrades, and you can see that their resources are 2, 2 and 3. So not particularly interesting, but that would be because it is the basic version, the basic race. You'll notice that this is a grey colour. Each of the expansion races come with a new colour, and they are just the bog standard items. So you can see I've bagged it up. I can't be bothered to unbag it, but you've got the grey cubes there. The other one is sort of beige and pink. Odd colours, but I suppose you've got to get 9 different coloured woods out now, so you can't judge too harshly. So that's Keepers of Magellan. Let's look at the other ones and see what other exciting races we have in store. So first up we have the Row Indie Syndicate. This is where we can start to see things getting shaken up quite a bit. The first big thing is there's no massive battle cruiser or whatever they're called, battleship. Okay, there's just cruisers and interceptors. So that's a pretty big mind-boggling thing to get your head around. Our starting techs are the Starbase and the Gauss Shield, so nothing very exciting there. The actual fundamentals of them, it's not hugely different to normal, so you still have the standard things. The only one which is probably worth noting is that the movement of our ships is 4. These guys are warriors through and through. So if you're one of these people, I'm pretty good at getting the traitor card. I've actually managed to have it 3 times, 3 separate occasions in one particular game. It was amazing that anyone would ally with me at the end. these are the guys that I should probably play. So let's just go and have a look at their special rules. Just before I do, it's worth noting that the resources they start on, nothing to really write home about. 2 money, 3 research and 3 manufacturing. Right, so what are the funky rules that we have? So, first up, we have 2 interceptors when we start the game, not 1. So we're already off to a good start for ruining people's day. We can only ally with 2 people, so we're not really big on allying people. We actually can only colonize 2 planets at once, so we only have 2 colony ships. And then we get to the really big game-changing ones. First up, the traitor card does not cost anything. Okay, it doesn't give us negative points. So that's a big thing. It means that people probably aren't going to ally with you. So that's a big one. This one is also big. You get money for blowing up people's ships. It's called pillage, and effectively you look at the number of tiles you're supposed to draw from the bag. So say I was supposed to draw 4 shields from the bag, and I take 1 away from that, and that's how far my money moves up. So I'd get 3 money for blowing up a ship that required me to draw 4 things. Again, that's pretty epic, especially when you consider that money can be turned into 2 of any resource. So the Row Indie, I'm very interested in seeing how these play. Obviously I haven't been able to play with very many of the new things. We've tried a few of the expansions, but not all of them. I think that these will require some significantly different tactics from a normal playthrough. So that's the Row Indie. I think it even gets a little bit more interesting from here on in. So now we have the Exiles. This is again very exciting because they're quite different again. So already you can see their starting technology is actually the cloaking device. So that's pretty cool. They've got one of these super rare technologies, and as a person who really likes orbitals and hammering away with research on orbitals, it's amazing to see that orbitals are a starting technology for this race. But wait, it gets better. Orbitals with guns. So we don't have star bases for the Exiles. No, they use their orbitals and they have guns on them. You'll notice they have 3 points, so they come armed with an ion turret, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously they can't have drives, but you can build that up. So that's pretty exciting. Stick a muon generator on there and get some plasma cannons, and you've got some pretty cool orbitals protecting your cities. Cruiser, Dreadnought, very much the same as usual. The actual rules for these guys are minimal in terms of differences from the normal races, actually. They only move 2, but other than that it's pretty standard. The only rule, which is of worth noting, is for every orbital you have a cube on, at the end of the game you get an extra victory point. I think these are going to be fantastic to play with. The idea of orbitals with weapons, you can't go wrong with that. It's a very cool thing. It's a bit of a girly colour, pink, but hey, I'm comfortable enough to use a pink pieces just so I can get access to these cool orbitals. So I think that's very exciting. Again, I think that this could change the game. Very good for turtlers. So if you're one of these people who likes to plink away at research, get up all 3 tracks to that 15 Veeps, this would be a good race for you to start off on. I think it's one of the more player-friendly or starter newbie-friendly races to have a go at. So that's the Exiles. Not that different, but we've saved the best till last. So we come to the last race, and this is the Enlightened of Lyra. Now you're probably starting to have a little look at the items and you think, there's nothing too exciting here. So bog standard ships, nothing too exciting there. Tech's not that great to start with. The distortion shield, -2 to missiles. A lot of people won't have missiles early on in the game, so that's probably the weakest tech that you can have. There are a couple of cool rules about the Enlightened of Lyra though that make them not maybe quite as bad as you would first think. So first up, when you're in a battle you can flip a colony tile to allow yourself a reroll. So you get a funky reroll pretty much every turn if you're sensible with your colony tiles, and you can do that any number of times. So if you haven't colonized any ships in a turn and you have all 3 colony ships, then that's 3 rerolls on any battle that you might face. So that's actually pretty powerful. The ability to reroll dice is something which we haven't really seen, so that's actually quite exciting in itself, especially if you start bumping it up with computers, and the Cruiser, the Dreadnought and the Starbase all do start with a computer as well, so it's not a bad thing to deal with. Now, the interesting thing is this little symbol here, and it's got a little planet symbol next to it, and this is clearly saying whatever these little shields are worth 1 Veep at the end. These are shrines, and at the end of every turn in your upkeep phase you can build 1 shrine. Now, you need to build orange shrines on orange planets, brown shrines on brown planets, and pink shrines on pink planets. If you've got a white planet, of course, you can build any one of those shrines. You're only allowed 1 on each planet, and each shrine you control at the end of the game is worth a victory point. There are 3 for each planet, so there's potentially 9 victory points here, provided you can control all of them. When shrines are built, they can never be destroyed, but you could obviously lose that planet. So this is effectively us trying to, I don't know, evolve beyond our bodies. It's a bit sort of the last season of Stargate styly. So let's have a look at what these shrines look like. They're not quite as exciting to look at maybe as I think that they perhaps are in practice. So we've got the orange, brown and pink tile with 2 cost, 4 and then 6, and then you have these snazzy tile bonuses. So once you have built 1 orange, 1 brown and 1 pink 2 tile, you will take this token away with you, and this is known as the Shrine of Freedom, and effectively it gives you the wormhole generator technology straight away. You can't argue with that. That's a very powerful technology, and I think that that might be why they've started with such weak technology on it. If you build the 4, the 4 and the 4 one, then you get to take this tile, and you can see here it quite clearly gives you an extra cube or an extra disc. So you'll take this purple disc and you can use that as a way to expand, just like you can do with the quantum grid and so on and so forth. So it means that the rest of the game, everything's going to be that little bit extra cheaper. And then finally the 6th one's probably the most boring one. Lo and behold, it's 3 Veeps. So not that exciting. But appreciate that there's potentially 12 victory points within the shrines from the Shrines of Libra. And again, I just think it's really marvellous how dynamic this will change the game. So the XRs will be building their orbitals, the Rho Indy will be blowing everyone's ships up just so they can get money, and these guys will be happily praying away to their gods, and then naturally they're going to get 12 victory points because they're going to evolve beyond their bodies or whatever, and then they're going to be like gods or something. I don't know, but it's pretty exciting. So that's the overview of most of the rules. I haven't gone into some of the smaller bits. I haven't gone through all of the tiles you're going to see. I'm just trying to set you up so you understand the main rules. I haven't bothered with the 7 to 9 player variant. It comes with some tokens, and to be honest, I haven't really read the rules on it myself because there's just no way on God's green earth I'm ever going to play a 9-game player over Eclipse. It would take forever. I know the rules in the expansion are deliberately designed to mean that more people can have their go at once, but then I think you're losing an element of the gameplay and the enjoyment watching what other people do and have they taken your wonderful research action and things like that. So that's the overview of the game. I hope it helps people clarify what's in the box when you're coming to Eclipse and how these things are integrated. Most of them, the developments just sit alongside, the tiles are shuffled into the deck, the research go into the bag. They are very, very easy to insert what you want, and you don't need to insert all of them. So if you want to play the Light of Lyra and you want no other expansions, off you go. I suppose you do have a slight advantage, and you're the only one who has a distortion shield, but it's not that big an advantage. It doesn't change the game that dramatically. So I think it's a really cool expansion. It adds a lot to the game. It's not even that expensive, and I think that the publishers have been really fantastic in adding extra components. So all in all, I think it's a very worthwhile purchase if you enjoy the base game that is Eclipse. So hopefully you found this useful. Join me on the next instructional video.